This is Matthew of Another World Terraria, where I teach and inspire you on the topics of rare plants and artistic nature displays. In this video, I'll begin the tour of my entire rare terrarium plant collection. This is part 1 of a series of videos that will give you behind-the-scenes access to my entire collection of terrarium plants. Before we begin the tour, I want to go over a few important things. I won't be talking much about the growing conditions, lighting, watering, etc. of the plants and bins unless something stands out as notable in a particular case. Most of the info about how I grow my plants can already be found in my playlist called How to Grow Terrarium Plants, as well as lots of other videos and tutorials such as my Immersed Bucephalandra series. Many of my plants are not identified, so unfortunately I can't tell you the name of every single one. If I know the species, I'll tell you that. Otherwise, I'll tell you the genus if known. Otherwise, I'll tell you what family or type of plant I think it might be. Many of my bins have a lot of small plants all mixed together, so I won't be talking about every single plant. I'll just go over any that I think stand out or that I otherwise feel like talking about. A few other quick things before we begin. First, currently I do not sell plants, so I won't be replying to any inquiries about that. And second, most of my plant sources are private contacts, friends, etc., which I can't freely share, so I won't be replying to requests asking where I got my plants from. However, if you would like to collect these type of plants, I've put some helpful info on my FAQ page on my website. It gives tips about how to build up your own network of contacts and gives a few suggestions of where to begin. Okay, this bin has some stuff from Ecuador. I did an import and got a few things in. I believe this might be Begonia semi-ovata. It's just a really beautiful species and it's blooming for the first time. This one actually popped up from seed that was in some moss, so I didn't even order that. It just happens to be like a bonus plant that I got, so I'm pretty stoked about that. It's really beautiful. Have this other plant here. I have no idea what this is, this little plant here. I think it might be in the family Gesneriaceae, but I'm not sure. But it's a cool little trailing species with interesting leaves. Really like that one. And then there's a few other things in here, kind of hard to see, but there's a little tiny Peperomia with little round leaves, and there's some filmy ferns and stuff in here too. Okay, here's another bin with some stuff from Ecuador, and there's probably some other things mixed in there that I might have put in at some point. This one is pretty rare. This is a fern from Ecuador. This is Coclidium cerulatum, so it's a very miniature species. It has fronds that have serrated edges, and that's where the name comes from, cerulatum. This is a liverwort in the probably in the family Plagiochylaceae. So this is similar to the ones that people grow in aquariums called Cameroon moss. It's actually a liverwort, not a moss, but this is probably the same family. Got some other little Ecuadorian ferns, a little miniature asplenium down there. This plant here is in the family Melastomataceae. This is a really interesting little plant that has strange bullate leaves and little hairs on it and stuff. This is just some plant that popped up from seed from Ecuador, from some moss, and I think it's a really cool plant. Has interesting leaves. Have no idea what this is. There's a really beautiful little feathery miniature fern right over here. It's one of my favorite ferns. Here's another bin with a bunch of ferns and cool stuff from Ecuador. Some really beautiful ferns right here. Very stunning, incredible divided pinna that are rounded and very intricate. This one grows baby plants on the tip of the frond. You can see that a couple of them touching the wet side of the bin, and then they just root and grow another plant. Number of ferns do that. There's a cool one sticking up right here that has a little new baby plant. Some nice little asplenium down here. It's one of my favorite species that I have from Ecuador. Here's a really nice fern too. This one gets quite a bit bigger, I think. I have another one in a bin and it's huge. Okay, this is one of the smallest plants that I have, and definitely one of my smallest ferns. It gets fronds up to about 1 inch long, maybe 3 times the size of the frond you see there is the maximum. And this little brown thing that looks like thread is actually the rhizome, which the plant spreads by and pops up new little plants. This one right here is Deuteroconia brevifolia. This is actually in the plants categorized as bromeliads. This one I believe is from Argentina, and it grows on cliff faces and stuff in pretty arid climates, so doesn't get a lot of water in nature. Very stiff and very sharp, almost like a cactus or something like that. Super cool little plant. Here's a relatively common little peperomia. This is Peperomia emarginella. Even though it's kind of common and sort of a little weedy type of thing, I still really like it. I think the foliage is really pretty. It's got little hairs on it and some sort of almost veins. Here's a bin of some ferns that are much too large, but I like them so much that I can't bring myself to get rid of them, which is the case with a lot of plants that I have. They're, you know, much bigger than I really can handle, but I just keep them anyway because I like them. Really, really beautiful. All this stuff is from Ecuador. Really nice fern here. This one almost looks like, or almost seems like it's like a tree fern kind of. This is really beautiful, interesting frond shape with these pinna that come off like that, and then there's one down the middle. Super nice. There's another one over here that's similar back in the corner. Fronds have similar shape but not quite, and definitely looks different, so that one's a different species. There's a really nice fern right here that has very interesting overlapping pinna. See how all the little leaflets or pinna on the fern are overlapping each other. Very strange, and a cool shape too. I really like the shape of these, so that's a really neat fern. It definitely gets a lot bigger than this. This is a micro orchid species. This is Specklinia dressleri. It's also, the synonym is Pleurothallis dressleri. Definitely a nice orchid species. It stays very small and gets beautiful reddish orange flowers that are actually very large compared to the size of the plant. I featured this species also in my 10 smallest plants video. Just some really beautiful moss in here, a couple different ones. Okay, this is an unidentified Begonia species from Borneo. It's got stunning foliage with the polka dots, and it has little hairs all over the leaves, little trichomes sticking out from the leaves. It's got pinkish red stems, and the foliage can get a lot darker green than this if it's in lower light. It gets a lot bigger than this. This one is propagated from a leaf cutting. Here I've got an epiphytic fern species. This is in the genus Microgramma, and I believe the species is Vexinifolia. It's got a very nice frond shape and grows, you know, trails up and grows up things. So that's a really nice one to grow on, like a terrarium background or a log or something like that. This is one of my favorite bins. It has a bunch of really rare filmy ferns and some other cool stuff. Believe it or not, that actually is a species of Begonia. That's Begonia bogneri, and this little white flower here is that, Begonia bogneri. Here I've got some Biophytum species, which is a really interesting little plant that kind of resembles a miniature palm tree. Very, very nice filmy ferns, really beautifully divided fronds. Show you over here. Yeah, there's some nice ones in the corner there. I've got a Philodendron in here. This one growing up against the side of the bin here. Over in this corner here, there's a little tiny liverwort. Another bin that has a lot of filmy ferns in it. I should note about filmy ferns that they need extremely high humidity, and they generally like to be pretty wet. I do have an article on my website that talks all about how to grow filmy ferns, so go ahead and check that out if you're interested. Look at those fronds, how finely divided and delicate they are. I like this one, how it's so long and thin on the frond shape. Let's see, got some mold up here. Still haven't really dealt with that. I definitely need to get in there and work on that mold. Luckily it's pretty slow growing type of mold. Filmy fern in the corner there that has just kind of long, thin strap-like fronds. They do have serrated or kind of undulate edges, which is makes it really interesting. One of my favorite filmy ferns that I have is right down here in the corner. Very unusual for a filmy fern. This one right here has some really interesting fronds that are kind of half moon shaped but divided. It's almost like a peacock tail or something like that. That one is most likely a Cryptocoryne genus. This is a Philodendron species that is probably from Borneo with overlapping scale-like foliage and branching out into a fan-like pattern. There's some bryophytum up here, not doing too good because they're up against the lid of the bin, so the leaves are kind of rotting and falling off. I should probably move those down. It's a little mini philodendron species, probably from Ecuador. It's got interesting ribbed foliage and stays pretty small, just like this, so that's a good miniature plant. Compared to a lot of other philodendrons, they get huge. There's a little kind of vining trailing plant right here. It's so small, it's really hard to show you, but it has very cool tiny little leaves that have kind of dentate edges. I don't know what genus that's in. It might be in Untitled, but I'm not sure. All down in here is kind of a mess of a vining plant called Neomortonia rosea. It's just a tropical vine. Can get a little bit shrubby if it's, you know, allowed to mature and hang down like an epiphyte, and then it gets these beautiful large flowers that are kind of like orchids and have a fringe on it. It's never bloomed for me. I probably need to change the conditions to promote more maturity and blooming. This is the same thing I showed you on the other side of the bin. That's that little pilea or whatever it is, and I'll get you some close-up of the Philodendron since I didn't get close on it before. This bin has one of my favorite fern species in it. It's this one right here that's all over the place. Beautiful shape to the entire plant, as well as each pinna. Spreads by rhizomes all over the place and pops up new plants. Some of these fronds are actually fertile. You can see the spore underneath. This fern right here is a very weird species. I have no idea what this is. It's very kind of thick and plasticky feeling. Doesn't really look too good in here. I think it might like some different conditions and probably more room to grow, but that's a neat one. Hidden down in the corner there is an extremely small fern. It's Asplenium holoflebium, and that is actually one of my favorite plants of all time. Spreads by little tiny thread-like rhizomes. Extremely slow growing plant. Sometimes a little finicky, but sometimes it seems to do well. Hidden in the other corner of the bin across the way is this other very finely divided fern. It's a little mini species. Has not got much larger than that, and it's very, very, very slow growing. I think that is probably in the genus Asplenium. I don't know the species, and it looks kind of similar to some of the other ones I've seen in the hobby, but I think it might be something a little bit different. Maybe a related species to some of the more common ones that you would see. This may not look like much, and you won't be able to really see the detail that I wish you could, but this is a bryophyte. I just pulled it out of that bin we were looking at. I think it might be a liverwort, but it's also possible that it might be a moss. But it's so small that you can't even see the leaves unless you use a magnifying glass. And it's very beautiful the way it grows in the bin, kind of in a veil, and it just climbs. It's just absolutely incredible bryophyte. This plant with really beautiful foliage that has kind of a silver veining to it. It's not doing too good right now. The plant crashed recently and some of the leaves started to turn brown and things like that. I'm going to do a few things to try and get it to come back. The identification is unknown on this. Got some very special plants in this bin here. I have this fern with silver pinstripes on very dark green fronds. I featured this one in my video about my most beautiful foliage plants. Closer up view for you. This other larger plant over here is also a fern. I don't know for sure. This might be in the genus Oleandra. Fronds are pretty incredible on this one too. Very, very thin fronds with somewhat translucent. You can see my fingers behind it. Undulation and veins going off to the side. Gets a lot bigger than this, and it has a rhizome that branches out everywhere and it just spreads. So this one's going to outgrow this bin. I'm going to have to move it. Down below the ferns is a really nice plant. Sort of died off a little bit, but it's coming back. The leaves just right there in the center has pubescence on. It's kind of fuzzy, and those leaves can get, you know, a bit bigger, and then they get a maroonish brown color. So very unique plant. Hopefully that one will come back for me. This actually just popped up from seed with some other stuff. It's just a neat little plant. I like that one, even though it's simple. Nothing super exciting, I just think it's a cute plant. Very aesthetically pleasing bin here that's grown in with a bunch of ferns. Got a couple epiphytic species of ferns here. Peperomia nummularia, kind of pubescent foliage, so the fronds have fuzziness to it, especially on the bottom, but also the top. And same thing with the rhizomes here, they have white hairs on them. This is Lemophyllum microphyllum, another fern. This one has glossy fronds, and you know, they're kind of shiny and smooth, and there's no hairs on them. They're not pubescent. So that's one of the ways you can tell the difference between the Lemophyllum and the Peperomia. All over here and below the Peperomia is just that huge clump of that very finely divided, really beautiful miniature fern, probably in the genus Asplenium. That one is going around in the hobby. Some people are saying that it's Asplenium fragrans, but I'm not super convinced that that is the correct identification. In any case, that's a really nice fern that stays pretty small from what I can tell. There's a bunch of little liverworts. That is the plant that people grow in the aquarium hobby that they call it Cameroon moss, but it's a liverwort and it's most likely in the family Plagiochylaceae. And there's some other really beautiful liverworts down there too, a bunch of leafy ones. There's also some really fine green liverwort down here that I'm thinking is probably in the genus Borneo. It tends to kind of come and go through the bins. It sort of pops up for a while and then it goes dormant and then pops up again later. Here's a pretty insane bin of Bucephalandra, totally grown over. Some really nice species in here. Some of my favorite Buce are in this one. Everything's just blooming and going bonkers in there. I really like this one over here that has the undulate edges to the leaves, and this big guy over here. Many Bucephalandra have kind of a shiny foliage, but this one has kind of a matte finish to the leaves. Almost glaucous, but not really. There's a really nice one over here that has lanceolate shaped foliage, and there's a really cool liverwort down here. Okay, let's take a look at this vertical conversion 20-gallon long tank. I used a frog cube to make this into an epiphyte growing tank. Let's take a look inside. Right up here we've got a Petrocosmea, which is a gesneriad. Typically they grow in China on the mountains. They grow in rock crevices and they like really good drainage, and they don't like to have water on the foliage. This over here is a Pleopeltis species of fern. It's often known as the resurrection fern. So if that one goes dry, the fronds will curl up, and then when you give it some water after so many hours, it'll just open back up again. Back here we've got an unusual looking orchid. This is Dendrobium prentitii. It is a species that comes from arid climates. It's kind of a drought tolerant, and it's got beautiful little whitish flowers when that one blooms. Okay, got another orchid here. This is a nice miniature one. This is Barbacella decenii, and when it blooms you barely even notice the flowers because they're so tiny. Got some nice moss on here too. Got some Octoblepharum moss right there, and some other nice mosses and liverworts. Below the Barbacella, got another miniature orchid. This is Pleurothallus microphylla, and some nice liverworts, and looks like some fern sporelings, little ferns. Okay, down here at the bottom we've got a gesneriad. This is Reldia minutiflora. It's a small plant and has really stunning foliage. Look at that texture and the color too, and the underside. Really pretty plant, and currently it's blooming. You can see the little flower there if I can get it to stop shaking. Kind of hard to. In any case, that's a very good miniature plant there. Right over here I've got a fern from Ecuador. I don't know the identification of that one. It's extremely slow growing and has not really been doing very well for me. It's just, I can't seem to get it happy. I'm going to mess around with conditions and hopefully I'll find what it likes. This is a miniature epiphytic fern species. This is a form of the species Lemophyllum microphyllum. The form is called shishi. So Lemophyllum microphyllum shishi. It's a lot smaller than the actual species, the normal form of the species that has round leaves and is a lot bigger. This is a very tiny form of that. Very nice plant. Very slow growing though. I actually had to pull the moss off of there so that you could even see it because the moss was covering it. That's how small it is. Back here we've got a miniature orchid. This is Bulbophyllum maquilingense, yellow flower form. There's also a purple flower form. Nice foliage, but the flowers are really beautiful. Vining plant from the family Melastomataceae. This one has pubescent like hairs all over it. It's got nice shiny leaves, good color, and this one will climb and it'll get quite large. So that's an unidentified species from Peru. Alright, we're going to go through some smaller deli containers and various other containers. This is Peperomia species Ecuador. It's just a attractive little vining trailing plant with some nice veining on the leaves there. Here's a much better look at that Lemophyllum microphyllum shishi, which is that epiphytic fern that we saw in the 20-gallon vertical with the other epiphytes and orchids. This is a clearer view so you can see the fronds, the shape of them. Very odd shape of foliage there. Here's one of my favorite plants. This is Cryptocoryne parva mini form. So this is an extremely small form of the species of Cryptocoryne parva. It gets about not even a ½ inch tall. It is painfully slow growing though. Very, very slow growing. Here are two very unique miniature orchid species. These are both native to Australia and they are drought tolerant succulent species with crassulate foliage. Crassulate meaning thick and kind of succulent. This is Dendrobium terraceae and this is Dendrobium lichenastrum, and they are both lithophytic or epiphytic, so they grow on rocks and branches and things like that, and tree trunks. Got a very unique and interesting filmy fern, a little mini filmy fern in this container here. I'll try and show you the fronds. There's two fronds together right over my finger there. Very beautiful, really nice shape on the foliage there. Filmy ferns are in the family Hymenophyllaceae, and this one is one of the slowest growing species that I have. It's pretty ridiculous how slow it's growing. Here's another filmy fern. This is an extremely small species, very, very, very micro. Here are the fronds right there. There's a bunch of fronds all right there on that little stem. Kind of rounded. Here's another frond right here. Very beautiful. Yeah, look at that. Here's another filmy fern species. This is one of my favorite filmy ferns. Really, really attractive. I'll bring up one of the fronds. It's not looking at its best right now, but you can see at least the shape of the foliage there. There's a new frond right here growing. Compared to some other filmy ferns that I have, this one especially likes to be very wet. This one grows best when it's super wet, and in fact it does very good on drip walls and things like that. Really likes to be in the water. It also will grow underwater actually. I have a small container with some very nice bryophytes in it and a random fern that popped up. I'll show you the key items in here. Very nice leafy liverwort right here. And over here is a liverwort in the genus Trichocolea. So this is a tropical species. Incredibly beautiful. There's a bunch of cool stuff in here. There's a very nice moss down here, really small. And here's a Gesneriad from Ecuador in the genus Amalophyllon. Has very attractive foliage with serrated edges. Got fuzzy pubescence all over it, nice colors to things. You can see kind of the veining in it, and it gets really pretty little whitish flowers as well.